Welcome to the December podcast episode of Radiology AI. My name is Dania Daye, and I'm the Associate Editor for Social Media for Radiology AI. And today, my co-host Paul Yee and I are very excited to bring a new episode of the podcast where we will be interviewing Dr. Maryellen Giger and Dr. Matt Lungren about MIDRC. MIDRC is a joint RSNA ACR AAPM effort to create an open source data set with tens of thousands of COVID-19 medical images for research. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lungren and Dr. Giger. Dr. Giger is the A.N. Pitzker Professor of Radiology and Vice Chair of Radiology for Basic Science Research at the University of Chicago. For over 30 years, she has conducted research on computer-aided diagnosis, including computer vision, machine learning, and deep learning. Dr. Giger is also the principal investigator of the NIBIB MIDRC contract, which is a joint effort between the three societies, RSNA, ACR, and AAPM, to create the large-scale multi-institutional data set for COVID-19 medical imaging and research collaborations. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Giger. Dr. Lungren, thank you also for joining us. Dr. Lungren is the Associate Professor of Radiology at Stanford and co-director of the Stanford Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging, AMI. Dr. Lungren's research is in the field of AI and deep learning in medical imaging, precision medicine, and predictive health outcomes. His work has been funded by the NIH and NSF, and he has been featured in national news, including NPR, Vice News, and Scientific American. And he regularly speaks at national and international scientific meetings on the topic of AI in healthcare. We are very excited to have both of you with us today. I will turn it over to my co-host, Dr. Paul Yee, to start the discussion.
All right, so thank you, Dania, and thank you again, Drs. Giger, Dr. Lungren, for joining us. We're really excited to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We're very happy to be here.
So both of you are leaders in AI and radiology, but you both come from pretty different backgrounds. Dr. Giger, you as a medical physicist, and Dr. Lungren as a pediatric interventional radiologist. Can you share with us, maybe starting with Dr. Lungren, how you got involved with AI and specifically to the areas that you're now working in today?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And a lot of people just assume there's AI in the water at Stanford, and so we're sort of all somehow involved. But when I came here, I had done a lot of work with my public health background, looking at large scale data sets for outcomes, and how we could tie that into making better decisions about imaging and clinical decision support. And a lot of the work that I'd done to assemble these data sets and sort of analyze them was shockingly manual. And when I came to Stanford, I was quickly introduced to a lot of the computer science luminaries who, many of you know. And it became fairly clear to me, at least, that this is going to be important, at least for the work that I was interested in at the time. And then, again, as I spent more time, again, just in the ecosystem here, it's just a wonderful environment where, our campuses are, the med school and the university are just across the street from each other, really. So I had a lot of opportunity to interact. I had really interesting people. A lot of exciting work was going on in computer science, in the last 4 or 5 years, especially. And so the more we talked, the more we got to know one another, the more use cases seemed to make sense. And so that's kind of how it started. And I think it's probably fair to say that this is now sort of happening in a lot of places, and it's been really exciting.
Dr. Giger.
Yes. So I've been at the University of Chicago all my career, and as a medical physicist, we are interested in improving the medical imaging exam, and that consists of improving the medical imaging as well as improving the image interpretation. So initially, we are looking at how can you improve, for example, the signal-to-noise ratio in a medical image. However, the exam also includes the interpretation. So the goal was then to also improve the interpretation, which was mainly done by radiologists who do very well, but potentially could AI and help in their assessment of an interpretation of medical imaging. So we first started in the mid-'80s looking at and developing computer-aided detection methods on lung nodules and chest radiographs and lesions on mammograms. And then we translated them in the US, since roughly now maybe 90% of screening mammograms include some type of computer detection. And back then it was called computer-aided detection or computer-aided diagnosis because the AI algorithm was intended to be used as an aid to the radiologist. Now, folks are looking at AI not just to aid the radiologist, but maybe help triage and prioritize cases for the radiologist, or in some cases, scan the images without human involvement. So after computer-aided detection and computer-aided diagnosis, and I should point out that computer-aided diagnosis is interested in assessing the likelihood that a lesion being examined, what is the likelihood that it is cancer or not? And we then would talk what further information is needed so a radiologist could recommend the next best patient management step. So my research then evolved to include development of AI to assess risk of future cancer, as well as to assess responsive therapy. And besides and beyond breast cancer, my lab works on thyroid cancer, lupus, various lung diseases, and other cancers. And in the past year, with the onset of COVID-19, my lab has been developing diagnostic and prognostic AI methods.
Wow, thank you both for sharing your backgrounds. It's really interesting to see how you've come from different places, different perspectives, but really your paths have led you to this field and ultimately towards working together in the MIDRC. So as we all know, COVID-19 has led to an outpouring of scientific efforts worldwide, as well as collaboration to fight the pandemic. And one of the exciting things that's come out of all of this in the radiology world is the Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center, or MIDRC. Could you talk about how MIDRC came to be and what its purpose is?
The COVID-19 pandemic presents an urgent and critical public health crisis, with medical imaging playing a critical role in any comprehensive epidemiological approach to defeat this disease. So essential biomedical research, including utilizing digital medical imaging, is needed to address improved detection, differential diagnosis, triaging of patients, to help in prognosis, including prediction and monitoring of treatment, and ultimately for population-based surveillance and prediction of a resurgence. So with this pressing public health need came the need to aggregate, disseminate, and provide machine intelligent analyses of COVID-19 medical images with associated clinical data. So in response to this need, having been in communication with NIBIB over the past few years, looking at how the medical imaging community should respond with specific use cases, and then COVID-19 happened. In response to that need, the ACR, RSNA, and the AAPM, along with 20 other academic institutions and the FDA, are now jointly developing MIDRC, the Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center. And this is funded through the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, NIBIB, at the NIH. And it's hosted at the University of Chicago, but led by all three organizations. The two scientific components of MIDRC are: one, we want to create an open discovery data repository, a data commons that includes ability for testing, quality assurance, diversity, and large-scale data connectivity. You might think of it as the ImageNet for medical imaging. But there's another component too, which is to develop machine intelligence computational capabilities, that is, clinically relevant algorithms and software tools, and help disseminate all this to other researchers for the benefit of the public.
Yeah, and I think that it's just such a terrific effort, and from my perspective, in being a part of this larger initiative, when you mentioned sort of the idea that this could be a medical ImageNet, we've been talking about this, as you know, as a community for years. I mean, we recognize the importance of multi-center data, diversity of data, and volume of data, really to power these transformations that we're seeing. And I guess the silver lining of the pandemic is probably just that it created an urgent use case, right? And we had lots of conversations leading up to this, where we had said, we really should get everyone together on the same page to focus on putting together a resource like this. And the critical components of this are not trivial. Providing anonymized data from multiple places is fraught with challenge. But beyond that, the effort that we're all putting into this is sort of emblematic of the fact that we know how much this will benefit the community. We've seen other open data sets around medical imaging, also around EMR data, that have really led to a lot of transformations in the field. We look at MIMIC, we look at some of the early work of the NIH, certainly our work, trying to make as many data sets open to the research and education communities as possible. But sort of to corral all these organizations together again to sort of rally around a given cause, I think this is really just a watershed moment, in my opinion, and really providing a use case that I hope, and as Maryellen can probably echo, will lead to more of this, right? I mean, there will be more use cases that we can then build with this infrastructure. And that's the key here. I think that as we've sort of seen, the amount of data that's available is sort of piecemeal, right? And it hasn't been largely coordinated. And we probably have missed opportunities, frankly, to coordinate better. And we've learned from that. And I think this will be, again, that opportunity to sort of build on this infrastructure and say, we have been successful in making this available. We've had some new learnings. Now what's next? And can we truly achieve something that resembles a medical ImageNet that spans across different diseases, different modalities, and certainly different populations? And that would, I think, really advance this field.
Yeah, I think all of that sounds incredibly exciting, incredibly interesting, and it's really inspiring to see how there's really been this sort of uniting of different experts from the RSNA, from the ACR, and the AAPM. And I think it's been a trend that I've been seeing. For instance, with the SIM-C-MIMI conference, it was a collaboration between SIM and the AAPM, with Jeff Siritzson from Hopkins, along with coordinators of SIM for the past couple of years. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, leading the MIDRC effort, how do you think having these different perspectives and entities involved was beneficial to making MIDRC a reality and, more importantly, to make it a success?
Well, if anyone in the US is in medical imaging, they are probably a member of at least one of these three organizations. Basically, the RSNA and ACR are providing vast network of radiologists, including those from academia, community hospitals, and private practices. The APM brings in medical physicists who are experts in assessing physical image quality, developing methods of harmonization, and providing rigorous methods of evaluations. And all three have experts at different stages of database creation and AI. So you can think of MIDRC spanning the nation and spanning the medical imaging community.
Yeah, and I'd echo that to say that, when I mentioned it earlier that we've had a lot of, sort of efforts that have come out of the society, certainly different institutions. I'm thinking specifically about the SIM challenges, right? I'm thinking about the RSNA challenges. And then I'm thinking about the expertise that the ACR has built around large, data set collection for analysis in some of the registries, right? And that's a tremendous amount of learning that, has happened individually, independently, I guess, in this case. And the orchestration by Maryellen and the leadership to bring these together, I think is really just going to pay a lot of dividends here, and we're going to be able to use the best of all the worlds that we've sort of grown up in, and as we've been trying to make these data available.
So it sounds like there are clearly a lot of moving parts in MIDRC. As you've noted, it's a huge, really a Herculean effort to unite different collaborators, different sites across the nation, even the world. And so I'm wondering, for anyone who might be interested in doing a similar type of thing in the future, were there any unexpected challenges or difficulties thus far in the first few months that maybe you didn't foresee?
Anytime you have a diverse group working together, there will be unexpected challenges and difficulties. But in this case, our differences actually bring us together better and I think produce a more robust, diverse product, which is MIDRC. MIDRC became official August 21st, 2020. So in less than 4 months, both the data commons infrastructure and early stage COVID-19 research are well underway, making it to reality. And groups across MIDRC, across the three organizations, are working weekly to establish items such as data elements, contributor agreements, de-identification methods, evaluation processes, and others. And these meetings can be intense at times, but we reach consensus on these various attributes of MIDRC. The three organizations, medical physicists and radiologists, have worked together in the past with data scientists, for example, in the creation of DICOM, and I think Matt knows that very well. And I think what folks don't realize is medical imaging is probably the most organized big data out there. We can read images from all over the world. They're very standardized and formatted. Of course, they come from different scanners, different populations, and they're being looked at on different clinical questions. So there is a need to harmonize. But it's been very busy, but we keep moving forward.
Yeah, and again, I think that, when you think about the challenges, I mean, let alone just from the organizational perspective, but, this isn't just a data only effort, right? This includes the deliverable of a platform and a coordination with, other types of data elements that are outside of just the pixel data, which is, it's going to be critical, right, for this field. And but I want to just emphasize one of the things that I think is the true value here beyond just some of the collaborations and bringing these pieces together. And that's actually the annotations by experts. We've seen a lot of data, even in the early days of the COVID pandemic, where, groups were releasing data, de-identified data, imaging data for learning and education. But unfortunately, without expert level annotation and some context from expert imagers, it really made those data sets slightly less valuable in that sense. And so, we recognize that bringing together thoracic radiology experts to assist in the annotation and the coordination, bringing in, again, the clinical data elements, which we all recognize are incredibly important. And in this particular use case, you're seeing so much change in that, a model that you may have trained and that was working well for example, outcomes prediction, and you did that in April. Would you really want to apply that now, right? All the things that have changed in terms of therapies. And so this has been really just a recognition that if we don't coordinate and we don't bring in the experts and all the different stakeholders here, we probably won't achieve the things that we know are possible. And so again, I think that's sort of the take home here from MIDRC, is just that this is an example of what we can do when we coordinate across societies, across disciplines, and with the help of leaders like Maryellen and others.
I'm sure many of our listeners are eagerly awaiting being able to access the data, especially with the quality of the annotations, as you mentioned, Dr. Lungren. So can you give us an update on the current status of MIDRC and when researchers might be able to access the data?
I can speak to just some of the earlier work. I think that, as some of you may be familiar, and not to get too into the weeds on some of the logistics here, but, we have from the RSNA side, and now with SIM too, have worked for many months actually collecting and annotating data in preparation for MIDRC. In fact, there will be a data set both of chest x-rays and chest CTs that have been expert annotated by our partners in the Society of Thoracic Radiology that we are planning to sort of make available as like a sneak preview of some of the things that MIDRC will eventually become. And that will be imminent. So within weeks of this broadcast, that will be available. But not to be the final product, but just recognizing sort of the need in the community and the urgency of putting out a data set that is high quality, that can serve both as a training and as a validation tool. And again, just to sort of make it possible to researchers looking into this to jump right in and start to build tools that may help us all.
Yes, and these cases, which will be provided at the user portal by Gen 3, they already have 2 data sets from TCIA, and these are being used to help establish the nodes for the data elements, the structure, and the usability of MIDRC. And MIDRC currently has 11 institutions working to donate data through either RSNA or ACR. And we expect soon from this pipeline within the next few months to yield about 25,000 cases. Now, besides cases, which is very exciting, and with the annotation, as Matt noted, very important data, we also will be helping investigators with tools. For example, a new someone who is an investigator in AI but hasn't worked with medical images yet. There's some items to learn. Working with images is not, each pixel can be considered a piece of data. So we will be putting some how-to papers up online. We will be having some online decision trees to help investigators understand what kind of metrics should be used to evaluate their AI algorithm. And all of that will be coming soon. We're on a very aggressive timeline, and so far, so good.
That all sounds really exciting, and I'm sure that data is going to be a catalyst for a lot of interesting work. But even before this large data set's released, there's been a lot of research published both in radiology and non-radiology journals using deep learning for COVID-19 diagnosis and prognostication on chest imaging and other medical data. But it seems like most of these aren't necessarily being used clinically. And so keeping in mind that the goal of this ostensibly to improve patient care and help us fight the pandemic, what do you think is the biggest obstacle between well-meaning research projects and making an actual difference in clinical deployment and practice?
I think we talk about this a lot, obviously, because we're all building tools and hoping to see them translate. And there is this sort of tension between the computer science development side, which is the sort of the move fast, break thing culture, right? And then there's the medical side, right, which we do, the first do no harm culture, and that intersection is important and provides us with a roadmap for how we judge a tool to be actually useful in practice, how we evaluate it, where it does well, where it doesn't. And I think by having the data out there, we can start to have the conversations, as you're suggesting, about where it does work and where it doesn't. Are there subpopulations? Are there certain confounders that are making the models perform in ways that we weren't expecting? These are all questions that can be answered, I think, by having everything out in the open in the way that's been sort of suggested here. And again, that will eventually lead, as we've seen with many other use cases, to translatable models that will actually inform care. The other thing to mention, of course, is that I kind of touched on it earlier, but this pandemic has it's almost been like 10 years learning in 1 year, right? You've seen so many changes in therapy, you've seen so many changes in recommendations and imaging, and lots of different suggestions about how to sort of evaluate these patients, and to sort of be able to translate a piece of that into practice in this kind of very dynamic environment. It adds another layer of challenge, and I think that might be part of it. But as we see, again, the vaccine is starting to roll out. This disease, whether it completely goes away, it seems unlikely, and sort of the burden of the asymptomatic spread and the reservoir for asymptomatic COVID infections will still present challenges to the healthcare system, from now on, right? So, being able to sort of think about these use cases now, constructing data sets and cohorts with the tools that MIDRC provides will help us sort of manage this pandemic as it kind of shifts into this new phase. Hopefully less of an imminent threat, but certainly will be, again, a public health concern for years to come.
Right. With MIDRC during this COVID era, we have demonstrated that 3 large organizations can work together effectively and rapidly for the common good. It's been impressive how all 3 organizations are so dedicated to this effort. Now, regarding translation for clinical deployment, we have to be able to train and evaluate the evolving AI algorithms on sufficiently large data sets. And those data sets should represent the specific clinical question, the specific claim of what the algorithm can do, and the specific population on which the algorithm will be run in order to avoid biases and cover diversity. So we have the developing technology and protocols to do so. However, we need institutions to donate their cases so we can de-identify them, curate them, and then use them in the research. So we need to make the medical imaging community fully open to data sharing. This is somewhat of a culture change, but I think that's the main obstacle, but I think it can be done. I think people in general want to be able to help fight this disease.
Yeah, and I like what you said there about a culture change. I mean, this is really about thinking of medical data in a different lens, right? Through a different lens. I mean, sort of thinking about it as this is a public good, right? This de-identified data could go on to, in aggregate, actually make care better for everyone else, and we can learn more by sharing. And that again, because it's such a challenging sort of discussion, I think for a lot of institutions, trying to reframe it in a way that sort of recognizes the broader objectives here and not focusing specifically on, the transactional aspect of it. And again, I think that's starting to happen. And the more data that's made available to the broader, research and education communities in efforts like this, I think will make it easier for others to join. And it's really just, it takes a big effort like this and a very visible effort to sort of convince some of those who may have been on the fence or maybe weren't even thinking about that to sort of jump on board.
Yeah, I think that this maybe shift in culture is something that I've personally been seeing throughout the radiology community, especially as we interface more with computer scientists, engineers, and as deep learning becomes a bigger thing. So, looking towards the future in our last few minutes together, what are you most excited about for the next decade related to radiology AI, COVID, or informatics, or really anything in general?
Well, I'm most excited that the next decade of medical imaging researchers will know that their main scientific and professional societies support them in open science to bring AI to mainstream radiology. AI that is unbiased and based on diverse data sets.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that and probably just add that, this is a demonstration that we are active participants and not passively receiving these things from other, domains. And we are the imaging experts. We are the domain experts. And we have an opportunity here to sort of demonstrate that we can take the lead on something like this and work together to create, hopefully, what will be many more to come. In terms of a platform and an infrastructure to make this data available to the world.
Yeah, and if I might note, I want to say that I think it was very visionary of NIBIB to see that in order to lead the medical imaging community, you should go to the lead organizations. And if you have the support of the lead organization, you'll have the support of almost every medical imager in the US. So I kudos to NIBIB on that.
All right. Well, thank you for the really interesting conversation, for the interesting insights and information about MIDRC and your predictions for the future. I think we're all really excited to see all of the data that's going to come out, the research that's going to come out of it, and ultimately the impact it'll have on patient care. So once again, thank you, Dr. Giger. Thank you, Dr. Lungren, for your time. And I'll give it back to Dania.
Thank you, Paul. And Dr. Giger, Dr. Lungren, thank you so much for such a great discussion and for sharing with us your journey in AI, your vision for the future, and for talking to us about MIDRC and all the very exciting opportunities it offers in the future. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to our December podcast episode. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our Radiology AI podcast series on any of iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Please stay tuned for our next episode.